Hello, and welcome to the Political Opinions podcast, where every opinion is given equal footing and political tolerance and debate are given their proper attention in a world where both are on the decline. Today's episode will cover different opinions on gun control. In 2020, America experienced 614 mass shootings, killing 446 people and injuring a further 2,500. While a figure like this might suggest to some an immediate increase in restricting gun control is necessary, there are substantial numbers of people who would disagree. Gun control is up there in the US as one of the most continually disputed and controversial topics, and there is no end in sight to this debate. Today, we will take a dive into this fascinating topic and compare the most prevalent arguments at play. While this episode will focus primarily on the US, a number of these arguments could easily be transferred to other countries. The aim of this episode, as always, is not to try and argue for or against one side of the debate, but rather to highlight the opinions on the topic and provide a comparison between them. With all that being said, I will begin with the arguments supporting gun control, followed by those opposed with a comparison at the end. For arguments supporting gun control, firstly, there is this point on popular support. Recent polls have suggested that over half of Americans want higher gun control in the United States, and therefore, as a democracy, to some, it just makes sense to increase the gun controls prevalent in the country. This opinion is likely influenced by the high levels of gun crime in the USA. In 2015, the USA saw 40,000 incidents of gun violence, which is admittedly quite a lot. And many people point to the fact that guns are easily accessible as the reason why gun crime is so high. For example, in the UK, where there are far more controls, the gun rate is 30 times lower, and this number isn't related to the smaller population of the UK, but rather the gun crime in proportion to the total population. People also say that it is unlikely that guns actually protect people. Mass shooters are rarely, if ever, stopped by armed civilians. There are admittedly a number of examples, but they are quite rare, and therefore to some, guns are a key cause of violence in their country without providing much benefit, at least to some people. There are also those who argue that the Second Amendment is misinterpreted. The Second Amendment allows people to carry weapons as part of a well-regulated militia in order to overthrow a corrupt government or protect themselves from invading forces. It doesn't expressly allow individual use. This is something that Supreme Court justices have interpreted over the years. And therefore to some, the right to bear arms is not only wrong, but also outdated. In the modern times, there are police forces, armed forces, and other means of protection that were not prevalent at the time the Second Amendment was written, and as such to some, they do not need guns, either as protection or as a right. Some people also view legally acquired guns as the real problem. You will always have guns that are obtained illegally being a problem. However, people on this side of the debate look to legally acquired guns that are so oftenly involved in mass shootings. Often, anyone, no matter what their criminal record, mental health record, whatever, can walk into a shop and buy a gun. You can even go to Walmart and buy a rifle these days. It's quite easy. And as such to some, more controls would make it harder for people more likely to commit mass shootings from acquiring guns. It wouldn't stop people, for example, banning guns entirely, but it might provide a benefit in terms of making it harder to get guns in the first place. And finally, there is this idea that gun controls wouldn't be too hard to implement. You don't necessarily have to ban guns entirely, but for example, increased background checks could be very useful in reducing the number of people who are likely to commit mass shootings from buying guns. For example, in the UK, there is very little to almost no gun crime. Often terrorists or other violent people are using acid bombs or knives in the UK. These gun controls mean that most people can't buy guns. Admittedly, these are stronger than many people in the US would want. However, it just serves as an example to show that gun controls can exist and can be implemented quite easily. For those who oppose gun control, firstly, on this question of whether it's popular and traditional, well, some people view the right to protect themselves from the state as a very popular idea in the US. Many people in the US support gun rights, and to them you cannot simply take that right away. They might point to, for example, tyranny of the majority. Although more people don't want guns or want more gun controls than do want guns or less gun controls, that doesn't mean you can simply take that right away just because the majority wants it. These people would also point to the benefits of guns. For example, it is argued that guns make society safer. 63% of Americans thought having a gun in their house would make it safer. Guns allow people to have self-defense. If you're up against someone with a gun, unless you have a gun, you're not going to be able to do much because, bullets move quite quickly. And whether it's a mass shooter or being attacked in the wilderness by a big angry bear, to some you need a gun to defend yourself. Then this also extends into the fact that guns are a right and are guaranteed by the US Constitution. The Second Amendment does provide the right to bear arms, and the Supreme Court has further confirmed that this allows individual people to own guns. Therefore, to some, not only are guns essential and positive, but they are also a right which cannot be taken away, especially since the Constitution has some pretty important rights within it. Furthermore, some people believe that gun crime is committed by criminals. You shouldn't take away rights from innocent people. Criminals will still find ways to find guns if you increase controls or ban them, and it simply means that civilians cannot defend themselves, and therefore to some, gun control wouldn't actually solve the problem. And this also extends into this commonly used argument that guns don't kill people, people kill people. The problem is with people using guns. Guns are just a tool. Just as in the UK there are very high levels of knife crime, so too in the US are there high levels of gun crime. Guns are often used in positive ways, such as sporting, hunting and protecting yourself, for example, and as such taking guns away from innocent people wouldn't solve the problem. And then finally, there's this question of privacy. Background checks would lead to yet more government information being stored about citizens, and some people simply oppose this further breach of their privacy. Moving on to the comparison then. On the question of what is more popular, those supporting gun control believe that most Americans don't want guns to be as accessible as they currently are, and therefore gun controls are the more popularly supported idea and therefore should be implemented. However, those opposing this argue, firstly, they contest the information at hand. For example, the fact that more people believe guns would make them safer could be used as evidence that more people believe that guns in some form or another should be available. But more than that, they fear tyranny of the majority. They argue this is an essential right for American citizens, and that cannot be taken away just because the majority of people in the US want it to be. On the question of what is the impact of guns, well, those supporting gun controls argue that guns cause lots of crime and lots of death. Controlling guns would not necessarily solve the problem in its entirety, but it would allow for more, control, make it harder for people likely to commit crime to access guns, and therefore would lessen the impact of them. However, those opposing this idea would argue that gun ownership makes society safer. Civilians are able to defend themselves from hostile encounters, be it again a mass shooter or a dangerous animal, and as such, the fact that guns exist is a positive one to some people. Then on to the ever fun question of, is it a right to carry a gun? Well, those saying it isn't argue that the Constitution is firstly outdated. You don't need to form armed militias nowadays because what would be the point of them? And you don't need gun control because the Constitution doesn't allow it. It allows organised militias, not individuals. And there's the idea that you could say, for example, you're trying to, overthrow a corrupt government, but it's pretty obvious that the US Navy and military and Air Force is going to be far more effective than an organised militia of individual citizens. However, those on the other side argue that the Constitution provides the right to own guns. Not only, as I have said before, is it necessary to have guns for the protection of society, but it is also an amended right within the Constitution which cannot be taken away. On the question of what is the necessity of the gun, while some people argue that guns are no longer essential tools, most societies can operate without them, and they don't stop other crimes from being committed. They're merely used as tools for both criminals and people who have, for example, mental illnesses to obtain them to cause harm to other people. However, those on the other side argue that guns are not only essential tools because they can be used for positive actions, such as, defending yourself from a big angry bear, but it is illegal guns that are the problem. Legally obtained guns are not an issue, but rather it is the guns that you don't see, the ones that are used by organised crime, that is the problem. Then on the question of what is the cause of gun problems and gun violence. Well, those supporting gun controls argue the problem stems from guns themselves. It is the fact that people can easily purchase guns that makes them more of a problem. A gun can do more damage than a knife, for example, and as such the fact that guns are so easily accessible is a problem. However, those on the other side argue that guns don't kill people. People kill people. Whether it's a problem with not incarcerating people likely to commit mass shootings, or again criminals obtaining guns illegally, they are not the problem, the people behind the guns are. Law-abiding citizens should therefore be able to own a gun. On the question of privacy, those supporting gun controls argue that background checks are easy and are not breaches of privacy. However, those on the other side, always suspicious of government as they are, would say that government records on people in any format is bad, and as such, an increased number of records is further cause for concern. And then finally, on this question of is it legal or illegal guns. While those supporting gun control argue that the problem is legal guns, of course illegal guns will always be a problem. However, legal guns are harder to deal with because anyone can buy one, and therefore anyone who wants to go and commit a mass shooting for whatever reason, for example, can walk into a shop and most likely will be able to get one at the moment. However, those on the other side argue the problem is with illegal guns, not legal guns. Criminals would still obtain guns illegally, whether or not there were gun controls, and as such it doesn't solve any problems from stopping law-abiding citizens from owning a gun. Overall then, those supporting gun controls question whether it is truly a right to carry guns, and believe that the Second Amendment is outdated. They believe gun possession does not deter violence, but rather increases it, and believes gun controls would reduce the negative impact of firearms. Those opposing gun control, however, believe it is a historical right which cannot be infringed upon. They view the cause not as guns, but people, and believe controlling guns would not have the impact desired. We may see a very important turning point in this debate under the Biden administration. In the next 2 years, given they control the presidential office, they control the House of Representatives, and using the Vice President, they have marginal control over the Senate. We may yet see an increase in gun controls by Biden. However, again, we will have to wait and see. Ultimately though, what do you think? Do you believe guns should be controlled, or whether people should just be allowed to own whatever they want? And do you believe the problem is with guns or with people using guns? Let me know in the comments below. And from my point of view, is there anything that I got wrong, missed, or could do better? As always, please let me know down below. As always, be sure to check back next Monday for another episode. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.